Welcome to Pop Culture Retro, which was recently voted the 15th best podcast by the residents of the Golden Years Retirement Community in Boca Raton, Florida. Each show, we'll revisit some of your favorite pop culture memories with insider and outsider perspectives. Now, please help me welcome your hosts, Ike Eisenmann and Jonathan Rosen.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Pop Culture Retro. I'm one of your hosts, Jonathan Rosen, along with Ike Eisenmann, and today we are thrilled to welcome a Hollywood producer, historian, and award-winning author who has written such books as Dishing Hollywood, Hollywood Haunted, and her latest, Top of the Mountain, The Beatles at Shea Stadium, 1965. Please help us welcome Laurie Jacobson. Laurie, thanks so much for joining us.
The screams of the crowd.
Yes.
So great to be with you.
Well, we're screaming. Well, so to start with, I read that you grew up in a creative family. Your mom was a painter. How about your dad? Was he very much into the arts as well?
No, not really. He was a sportsman, I would say. An athlete, a great athlete, my dad. Actually, he and especially baseball. I'm from St. Louis, and he wanted to be on the Cardinals so badly, and he actually did get a contract. And the next day, he got his draft notice. So I know that was the end of that, which was too bad. But he was that close.
Oh, really? So your mom kind of steered you into the arts?
She gave my brother and me just a fabulous introduction to the arts. I think I knew who the French Impressionists were before Dad taught us about the Three Stooges. So, and my parents both loved movies. Mm-hmm. So, we often went to the movies together as a family, and there were cast albums being played on Sundays. And so I was aware of entertainment on a lot of different levels because of their love of it.
Sounds like my house. We grew up with a lot of musicals all the time in the house. Dad did that. So, but I also read that books were important to you. So what were some of your favorites?
Of my books? Of
books? No, of books in general, with growing up.
Wow. Whoa. Well, I really still love Charles Dickens. I read a lot. My parents had a really nice library, and I loved English class at school. And Dickens, I love the way he introduces you to a lot of characters and then brings them all together for the big event, which is kind of what I did in Top of the Mountain. And I'm not comparing myself in any way to Mr. Dickens, but he had a huge impact on me.
Wow. Well, when did you start thinking you wanted to pursue a life in the arts?
Pretty much early on. I think I really remember, actually the Beatles when I was 10 just took over everything. And I thought, damn, I want something like this, man. I want to wear clothes that people want to copy, and I want to be on it. Yeah, that was pretty much it. And also my dad's family lived in LA, and we would go visit them, and it was so spectacular. And they had pink houses there, which they didn't have in St. Louis, so that was very impressive. And the palm trees. And my brother and I both decided early on LA is the place for us.
We keep hearing that from other guests, and the same thing happened to me as well when I moved to Los Angeles. The palm trees seem to be the most overwhelming thing, that we just could not believe. We're everywhere. So that's some sort of culture shock there. But who were some of your other influences as you started this life?
Oh, well, I should have thought. I didn't know you were going to go this way. So I haven't really, I haven't really thought. I don't know.
Fair enough.
That's a good answer. So I read you went into improv. It was taught by Harvey Lembeck, who was so great in the Beach movies, among many others. And your classmates included Robin Williams, John Ritter, and John Larroquette. So what was that atmosphere like? Can you tell us about Lembeck, and did anyone really stand out to you at that time?
Well, Harvey was, great. His peers, which were Phil Foster, Gary Marshall, Buddy Hackett, Jack Lemmon, a lot of people told him you can't teach comedy, but you could. You can't teach timing, and certain things are a gift, but learned so much in improv with him. And then, Robin, that was a no-brainer. I mean, everybody who ever saw him before he was famous knew he was going to be huge. He just was so singular, and also so damn nice. Just a really great human being, really a sweet guy. So was Ritter. Ritter was really sweet. And I never saw Ritter be as funny on television as he was in class.
Really?
When he and Robin got on stage together, it was a whole different John Ritter than you saw on Three's Company. And then they both surprised me when they went on to some incredible dramatic work. I think it was Edmund Gwynn on his deathbed said, "Dying is easy, comedy is hard." So, and Larroquette, he was a little bit older than we were, and more experienced, which meant he slept with a lot of girls in the class, but not me. He was having issues with alcohol at the time, and his wife had thrown him out of the house. He was sleeping in his car a lot at that time. It was really an incredible story, right? And then he, got his act together and went back to his wife, who happened to be a successful casting director. And next thing you know, he's on Night Court, and poof. And boy, he just took off, right? And it's everything. Emmys, Tonys, he's done so much.
And still doing it.
And never looked back.
Right.
And never looked back. The Ritter and Robin, they always came back to class. It's a safe place where you could try stuff and make mistakes and try new things and just exercise your comedy muscle. We never saw Larroquette again.
Oh, well, speaking of comedy being hard, you also did stand-up, which I always find incredible when anyone tries to do stand-up. What was your act like?
I had a lot of fun doing it. It was like when punk was taking off. I talked about the Beatles. I talked about the Sex Pistols, and just the different generation that we were moving into. But there weren't a lot of ladies at the time doing it, and it was another whole category to get into. I was already enough unemployed as an actress. So I didn't need another another entertainment career where I wasn't getting hired. So, what was a lot of 2 a.m., 10 to 2,
Right.
10 minutes to 2 o'clock, getting on stage in a smoke-filled room. I enjoyed it. A lot of guys and girls in Harvey's class came from stand-up, and I was a waitress at the Comedy Store. So I just thought, okay, I'll give this a shot, and I enjoyed it, but I didn't do it that long.
Did you meet resistance from the male comics as well?
Resistance? No,
No. Okay.
no.
Just
Those horny guys, no resistance whatsoever. Comics really, I don't know if I can say this, but comics, often have a really hard time getting laid. So no, if a girl was in the room, there was very little resistance.
but we're probably jumping around a bit here. But so you worked for the legendary producer Jack Haley Jr. You were the head of development. How did you come into that, and what was Jack Haley like, and what were some of your responsibilities?
When I met him, he was producing a television show, a magazine style show called Photoplay, which was based on the popular magazine of the 20s and 30s. And my first book had just come out, which was called Hollywood Heartbreak. And I came to his attention, and he invited me to write for Photoplay, which was just a great education for me. Suddenly writing for television. And we would do 6-minute segments on some aspect of Hollywood history. And, I loved That's Entertainment. That was the penultimate film for me on Hollywood history, and he was walking Hollywood history. He had an incredible memory for everything he'd ever seen, which he could recall, and he knew everybody between his parents introducing him to everyone they knew, and then, oh my gosh, and he was dating Nancy Sinatra, so Frank was a phone call away. It was awesome. It was really great. So I worked on that show, and when that show ended, I was lucky enough to go on with him to his office, and we worked on just fabulous projects. I met really everyone except Fred Astaire through. That was the one that got away. But I mean, to walk into the office and have, Debbie Reynolds or Paul Newman or, whoever was sitting there, Clint Eastwood, Burt Reynolds, just all kinds of people. And then, at the events that we worked on, to go and meet the Nicholas brothers, that was such a thrill for me. And all Ginger Rogers.
Amazing.
It was super. The best thing we did together, or rather, there were 2 projects that I really adored. One was the 20th anniversary of the Mary Tyler Moore Show.
You can ask about that, right?
That was amazing. And it was actually the first time the whole cast had been together since the death of Ted Knight. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of emotion there, and they were all incredibly professional, lovely, kind people, and that was a great experience. And
well, how are you feeling during this time that you're in charge now, this like legendary cast and such an iconic show that you're responsible for getting this whole thing together? How was that for you?
During the actual shoot, a lot of women on the crew would come up to me and say, wow, you're a producer on this show. That's amazing. And I didn't realize, that there weren't a lot of other women at that time doing it. And that's probably good that I didn't realize that. Jack was great to work with. Jack loved women. His office was mostly women. So I never felt any misogynistic crap going on there. He was great. And I'll tell you this story that I'll never forget. Mary had, who was incredibly kind. She brought the hat that she threw in the air, and she brought the M that hung on the wall of her apartment on the show. And her husband was on the set also, and he told me that she had auctioned off the M for charity, to raise money for charity. And he bid $10,000 on it to get it back. And here it is, and we're holding it, and it's so fabulous. And we're about to shoot the closing segment of the show, which was just Mary. And the rest of the cast had gone home, and she was changing for that segment, and the prop guy dropped the M, and it smashed into like 20 pieces.
Oh my Lord. Jeez.
Yes, that's what we're all like. We just froze. And I felt so sorry for that guy. And we thought, he went off and he glued it together, but was really obvious that it was broken. And Jack, who was directing it, he just was like, oh my God, if we tell her, we may never get the closing segment. So we all made a pact not to tell her. And now we're all complicit, right? I could barely look her in the eye when I had to go to her dressing room to get her. And she walked out on the set, and she took one look at the M. And we all, oh my God, you could have heard a pin drop, literally.
Oh,
and she just turned around and said, excuse me. And she went back to her dressing room, and we all were just feeling so terrible. And 15 minutes later, she came out completely composed and said, let's get this last shot. And I thought, wow, what a dame.
Oh my God, that is absolutely incredible.
She was really, and she never said, so many others would have and could have, who was responsible, and I want his head on a platter. And no, she took her moment to grieve over it, and then she came back out a complete professional and did what she needed to do.
God, well, thank you so much for sharing that. So at what point did your deep interest in Hollywood history become serious enough that you wanted to start writing about it?
Okay, I'll tell you the real story. Well, of course, I love Hollywood history. It's what made me want to move to LA in the first place. And back in when I was growing up, we didn't have cable and 100 different channels. There was the Late Show, and then the Late Late Show, and all they showed was Cagney and Harlow and Judy Garland and Hepburn and Tracy, and I knew who all those people were and loved them. And so when I got to LA in the 70s, it wasn't really that long ago. I mean, Betty Davis is still walking around, and you could see some of these big stars. And Schwab's drugstore was still there, and I would go there, and Shelley Winters was there, and people I recognized from 77 Sunset Strip, and and so it was very exciting. And then the waiters and waitresses and the maitre d's, they were all the same people that had waited on these people. And back in the day, people held their jobs for 40 years, and as the guards at the studio gate, and they were all very willing to tell their stories, so you'd be at Musso's, and they'd say, that's Chaplin's favorite booth. What? It was like, whoa. So that was really thrilling. So I would get these stories and I would repeat them at parties with my friends, and everybody was like, really? Whoa. And pretty soon I could tell the difference between what was studio publicity and what was really happening there, and how things were covered up and names were changed. And and that's when and also people, there was such tragedy amongst the success, and you couldn't make up stuff better than what was happening in real life, these cliffhanger stories. And so that's I started writing all this stuff down, and eventually my notes grew. People kept saying, you need to write a book, so I did.
Well, let's talk about your book. So now so you cover some fascinating material throughout all of them. Some I read, some I glanced through this past couple of weeks. So I love Hollywood history as well. And your first book, Hollywood Heartbreak, talked about the deaths of many celebrities, including you have about Alfalfa, F. Scott Fitzgerald, John Belushi, etc. But among the stories in there, you also have, Peg Entwhistle, William Desmond Taylor, and Thelma Todd. Would like to ask a little bit about them. Entwhistle is a little bit more famous, but William Desmond Taylor and Thelma Todd aren't as commonly known, and all of their deaths are kind of shrouded in mystery. So being a Hollywood historian, can you tell us about them, and for those who don't know about their deaths and what you learned about them?
Sure. William Desmond Taylor was a top director in the 20s. He directed the big stars, Mary Pickford, and a lovely little ingenue named Mary Miles Minter. So, cut to the chase, William Desmond Taylor is found shot to death in his Tony apartment on Alvarado, which was a very hot neighborhood at the time. And by the time the police are called, and this is still true today, the police are the last people that you call. The first people that you call are the studio or today the star's representatives. And by the time the cops got to William Desmond Taylor's house, it was loaded with people who were carrying out, this was during Prohibition, so they're carrying out the illegal booze.
My gosh.
They are burning letters and things and papers in the fireplace. They thought they didn't even know he had been shot until they turned him over. And then who killed William Desmond Taylor? And then they find out he wasn't really William Desmond Taylor. He was William Dean Tanner, who had abandoned a wife and child in New York and made his way across the country, changed his name, had this fabulous career. He had started as an actor, and the wife he dumped in New York saw him on the screen and followed him out there and found him. And then they find checks that were being written monthly to this daughter. Well, nobody knew this. Nobody knew this about him. He was a highly respected director at Paramount. And so this was just stunning news. And he was very dear friends with Mabel Normand, who was the leading screen comedian at the time, female comedian. And she was the last person to see him alive, except for the murderer. And he and one, the aforementioned Mary Miles Minter, who was way young and quite beautiful, and had a ruthless stage mother. Mary Miles Minter was madly in love with him, and they for a while they suspected that the murderer was her mother, and there were checks being written from her account to the district attorney. Oh, for years and years and years. The story is so complex.
Right.
And they're still not really sure who did it. It really looked like Mary Miles Minter's mother did it, and that's what I believed when I wrote the book. But recently, I guess in the last 10 years, this marvelous book called Tinseltown came out, and they think it was someone else. And they had a really strong argument. And, somewhere, I think in the 70s or 80s, there was an elderly woman who had been a silent screen actress, who had a heart attack at home in Beechwood Canyon, and her dying words were, "I killed William Desmond Taylor." And like the people didn't even know who she was talking about, so so that's part of the Tinseltown story. But it's a really fascinating story. And the thing about that murder is that the Fatty Arbuckle scandal was around the same time, and then the death of this gorgeous actor named Wallace Reed. They were all Paramount celebrities. They all Wallace Reed died from drugs, but the drugs had been given to him. He was traveling to a location by train and with the cast and crew of this film, and the train wrecked and he was terribly injured. But there they were at the location, and gee, we only need to be here for 3 weeks, so we'll just give him a lot of morphine to get through the shoot. And then he came home and he couldn't get off of it. And it was the first time that drug addiction was looked at as an illness, when he was wildly popular. And when people heard the story that it wasn't by choice that he entered into a drug life, that it was foisted upon him, and no one helped him. I mean, they just kept him on a treadmill of films while he was physically wasting away, and you could see it. And then he collapsed on the set, and they actually propped him up to get that last shot before they took him away to the sanitarium. When all of this became public, and his wife went to Washington, D.C. and spoke to Congress about, it was really, that's another, I mean, like I said, you can't make up stuff better than this. So Paramount was really in trouble. They almost went under with all of these scandals. And the Midwest, of course, freaked out, and all these religious groups, boycotted all these people's films. It ruined Mabel Normand's career, even though she had nothing to do with any of it. It was just really, really an amazing time.
Really.
And then you asked about Thelma Todd,
Right.
who was an adorable beauty contest winner and a wonderful comedian. And she worked with the great, great comics of her day, including the Marx Brothers and Harold Lloyd and all kinds of wonderful people. And she had her own series of short comedies. She was with Hal Roach, who did short comedies, Laurel and Hardy, the Little Rascals, and Thelma had her own series. And but Thelma was a really bad shopper when it came to men. She married a guy who was kind of a low-level mobster, and when she got rid of him, she was living with a director named Roland West out on Pacific Coast Highway, and they were on the outs, and she attended a party in her honor at the Trocadero one night, and basically he said, "You're home at 2:00 or don't come home." And she strolled in around 4 and was locked out, and a lot of people heard her pounding on the door, and there were kick marks, and he wasn't letting her in. So she walked up the hill to where she parked her beautiful Phaeton convertible, and she probably said, "The hell with you, I'm going to another party. You won't let me in, I'm out of here." So she goes up to her car, and I think he followed her there. And when she was drunk, and she started the car, and he closed the garage. "You're not going anywhere." And if you have to remember that the garages were only big enough to hold the car, a very small area, and we didn't have smog control then, so it probably took 3 minutes before she was unconscious, and 10 minutes before she was dead. And he opens the garage, and oh no. So he closes the garage and goes back home and fakes everything. And they had a nightclub up above. They had a restaurant in the building that they owned on Pacific Coast Highway, and she was opening a nightclub on the top floor. And rumors had it that a gangster wanted in on the money she was making, and that she had said no, and you don't say no to the mob. And everyone thought that her, so there were wild rumors about how she really, really died. And nobody knew until years and years later, when Roland West died, and he confessed on his deathbed to a friend, and that friend never told until he died, and then he confessed it. And because Roland West was in a fraud scheme with Joe Skank, who was head of 20th Century Fox, and again, you can't make this stuff up.
I love hearing this.
Skank said, "I'll protect you if you don't testify against me," and the fraud scheme. It just went on, and another Hollywood mystery.
Wow. Well, which leads us into your next book, All These Things, which I started reading this week, and I love ghost stories. I write spooky stories myself, so whenever I go somewhere, I visit haunted places, take the ghost tours. Your book, Hollywood Haunted, A Ghostly Tour of Filmland, is so good. It starts right off with a question that we were going to ask, and you answer it in the first few pages. You have encountered ghosts while researching this. So can you tell us about some of your own experiences?
Sure. Well, that's what started me on the book. I was in a historical society, and we were going to give a tour of Hollywood's grand movie palaces, on Hollywood Boulevard. So of course, Grauman's Chinese Theater was amongst those. And I went there early one morning, like at 8 a.m. with 5 other historians, maybe 4, I can't remember. But this employee was giving us a tour of the theater. And really, we were there to see where we were going to place our guides and what we were going to say about the theater. And she was telling us really cool stuff about the theater, like Sid Grauman. There were many premieres there, and after the premieres with all the stars, he didn't want to bring them to his messy office for drinks. So he actually had this little cocktail area built inside a wall. So you pushed a button and the wall opened, and there, and he would, after everybody left the theater, he would entertain the celebrities in there, which had been sealed up, but like, ooh, we were getting all these great stories. And she explained in the main auditorium that before the film, there was a live stage show. So the stage was quite enormous, and it held up to 200 actors. And she said, now the movie screen is much larger than it was back in those days. Would any of you like to go behind the movie screen? And I was the only one that wanted to. I was like, when am I going to get this opportunity again? So there was a ladder up against the front of the stage that you had to climb up, and then you were like on your knees on the stage. And I went behind the movie screen, and I was hoping I'd find, some initials on the wall or something exciting, but no, it was like toilet paper and light bulbs and nothing big. And I came back to the stage, and I climbed down that awkward ladder, and I walked back to them in the middle of the auditorium, and out of nowhere, the guide says, "This place is so haunted." And nobody said anything, but we were all compelled to look back at the stage where I had been standing. And there was a ceiling to floor velvet drape, and someone unseen who was standing on the stage had grasped the drape, and we could see the handprints, and that section only was lifted up off the ground and was shaking very angrily. And, it wasn't blowing in the wind. There were no doors or windows back there, and nobody else was in the theater. And I was scared, and we all left very, very quickly. The anger was so intense. And she told us that there had been an employee in the theater whose name was Fritz, and he had taken his life in the theater behind the movie screen.
Oh.
He hanged himself back there. God. I know. And she didn't know when, but she said Fritz's spirit was all around the theater, and that in that little hidden cocktail area room, they often heard the buzzer being pressed from inside, and it was sealed off, so nobody could get in there. What the women employees said, they all felt like somebody was spying on them in their locker room. And when you choose a public area to kill yourself, it's your spot. It had some kind of significance for you. And the anger, I think he let me know that he did not like me going back to his spot.
That's what I was going to say. He didn't want you back there.
No, he didn't.
Oh,
I was not about to argue with him either.
Oh, man, I don't blame you. Well, any other like frightening experiences like that while you were working on this?
Well, so that started me. I'd been collecting ghost stories, and there were always ghost stories attached to people who died before their time, whether it was an accident or an unsolved murder. And that ghosts stick around for, very human reasons. If they were murdered and it was never solved, they want justice or they want revenge, and it all started to make a lot of sense to me. So I grabbed a couple of psychics and some parapsychologists, and off we went to many of these places I had kept notes on. And then all of Hollywood just opened up, the Hollywood Athletic Club, and people called us. I mean, I saw the most horrible hotels and the most divine homes in Bel Air. It just ran the gamut. And yes, I never saw a ghost, but I experienced, noises and coins falling from the ceiling, and smells, really old fashioned perfumes, heavy flowery perfumes, alarms going off, also really putrid smells that could come and go in 5 seconds. When we'd ask for proof that you were there, boom, putrid smells, and then gone, immediately gone. No windows, no doors, no ventilation. So and then I learned to walk through areas more slowly, that I could feel. I felt pressure when a spirit was present. Like I was submerged a little bit, and and cold spots and things like that. But if you're walking at your usual pace, you don't really notice. But in these places where I was, so then it became apparent to me that I could walk into a room and, whoa, what's in here? I immediately felt that feeling. So it's kind of fun.
It sounds like it to me. So if you have to, what would you say is the most haunted place in Hollywood, and what's the story behind it?
Hard to say. I worked at the Comedy Store, and that place is loaded with ghosts. Okay, just loaded with them. And we experienced stuff there, all day, and then late at night after the crowds left, a lot of acting out and acting up, and ashtrays flying through the air, and voices, old-timey voices with, using old expressions. That guy two-timed me, he's such a heel, whoa. And other people saw, like, gangstery type people. When a club is that popular, the mob wants a piece of it. So we think, people got hurt there. And also, the Hollywood Palace, people return to a place that they loved too. So we would see people in, their employees saw people in tuxedos and old clothes. And when the balcony was closed, they would hear voices up there, and sometimes see older couples sitting there. And I think, people return to places that meant a lot to them, or where they had the best time of their life. Cielo Drive, at the top of which Sharon Tate and her friends were murdered. I mean, I just pull on to that street. I don't even make it up all the way, and I feel
You feel something?
Yeah, and Coldwater Canyon is just there were a lot of weird deaths there, and I think there's and so we were when we look, George Reeves had a mysterious death there, and Jay Sebring, who was killed with Sharon, his home was the former home of Jean Harlow and Paul Byrne, and Paul Byrne took his life there, and that was like right down the road from Valentino's house. And although he didn't die there, he was extremely despondent in that home. And then it was purchased by Doris Duke, the tobacco heiress, and she died there, and nobody really knows if it was a natural death or if her caregiver hurried things along. So, there's, and then at the base of Coldwater, when they were developing the area, they found the graves of some Native Americans, and apparently there was some kind of massacre there. What the hell is going on in Coldwater Canyon? I don't know. Monty Clift had that horrible car accident there. There's a lot of weird stuff in Coldwater. So it begs the question, which came first? Was that energy always there and it attracted some very negative things, or did that energy come from the negative things that happened there?
I'm glad I didn't know about this, because I would have avoided driving Coldwater Canyon the thousands of times I did when I lived in LA. That's amazing.
Well,
the property prices just plummeted.
Maybe not. Maybe the opposite, actually. So, but your next book, which I was looking through in anticipation of you coming on, the Dishing Hollywood, the real scoop behind Tinseltown's most notorious scandals. Each story is accompanied by a recipe. So before we get into some of the stories, what made you decide to do it that way?
Well, I had some new information about some of the people that I had already written about, and I was looking for a new format to write about them again. And there were some people that I hadn't written about before that I really want, and that were maligned in many other books. And I wanted to set the record straight for them. And so, and some of them were around food, and, like Mama Cass was one of the people that I wrote about. And like, there was no damn ham sandwich. That was just a horribly rude remark made by some jerk doctor, and she died of something we didn't know about then called sleep apnea. She had a sleep apnea induced heart attack, and it wasn't because she was eating in bed and stuffing her face. And she was the loveliest person and much beloved, not only in her own community, but she had millions of fans, and I just couldn't let stuff like that stand. So there were a few other people in the book. Poor Lupe Velez, did not die, as Kenneth Anger said, face down in the toilet, vomiting from an overdose of pills. No, she and that is her legacy. And she was also a very, very popular comedian in her day, a beautiful lady, with some great lovers. Ooh.
I was reading that in your book.
That girl got around. So, so there were stories I had to correct. And, Kenneth Anger had said she was eating this big Mexican meal and it didn't mix with the pills that she took. And that's why she was rushing to the bathroom to throw up and tripped and fell into the, so there were food involved in many of these stories. So I thought, well, that's the way to go. With the recipes.
Well, you just mentioned George Reeves. I mean, that his murder, not murder, but his death is still suspect, that they still don't know for sure what happened. So what can you tell us about him?
Murder.
You do think it's murder?
Red rum. Yes. Yes, and I was really fortunate. My friend, Catherine Lee Scott from Dark Shadows, got me into his house not that long ago, as I'd always, the people that live there said, they're just besieged with fans. They look up and someone's standing in the window. Can we come in? And they don't want to disrespect George Reeves in that way, which I found really charming and an anomaly in today's Hollywood, where other people would be selling tickets. And he did haunt that house for quite some time, but I went with a parapsychologist and we felt absolutely nothing. And I feel like he's gone now. But the autopsy alone tells the story. He was shot in the head and the gun was a minimum of 12 inches away. And at an angle like this, so who kills themselves like that? But if you're struggling with someone who has a gun, that's the position you're in. So he was just about to get married and he had a lot of things on his agenda that he was looking forward to. And, he was not depressed. So, he slept with a lot of ladies and, there were some cuckolded husbands that may have been responsible. That has never been solved. And, when, somebody fooled with his car weeks before, cut the brakes, his dog was stolen, that he and the lady he was, the married woman he was having an affair with were getting a lot of phone calls where when you answered, they hung up, like they're checking on when you're home and when you're not. So it was very suspicious. So what I have learned from all of these stories is that when a crime in Hollywood or Beverly Hills is unsolved, it's because somebody paid a lot of money to keep it that way.
Sure.
Especially when you have so many clues pointing to the fact that it was clearly murder.
Wow. Well, if we could talk about the Black Dahlia case and Elizabeth Short, this is still one of Hollywood's most infamous murders, and she's in the book. But what are some of the latest findings on her?
Okay, well, not many people agree with me, but and they think poor Elizabeth Short, and of course, her death was absolutely horrific. But I befriended a woman, and she and I are quite convinced that it was her father who killed Elizabeth Short. And they were both from the same area in Massachusetts. And they both moved across the country to California around the same time. And my friend said that wherever they stopped along the way, a woman was murdered. And she believed that her father was a serial killer who was murdering women that basically looked like his wife, all across the country. And she was often used when the father got to California. He was a low-level runner for the mob. When gambling boats were still existed 7 miles off Long Beach harbor. If you were 7 miles out, you could gamble, and then somebody had to take that money to the, to the right people. So her father ran errands like that for the mob. And he often used his daughter to attract women. A man with a little girl walking on the beach, you tend to trust. And she said then Daddy and the woman would walk away and only Daddy would come back. And she told me that, she told me that Elizabeth Short and her father ran a pedophile ring together in Hollywood on Hawthorne Avenue, just off La Brea. And they used her and her sister, and I don't know who else. She only remembered what happened to her with her Aunt Betty. And she said she was there, and a policeman came to the door, and she thought, at last I'm going to be saved. And then, he had sex with her and Aunt Betty. It was a pretty graphic and horrible story. So Aunt Betty ends up pregnant. I'm not sure. Nobody's sure by whom. Could have been any number of people. And she shows up at my friend's house seeking help from her father, and her mother went ballistic. At this point, Betty was manic, and the wife comes home and finds Betty in the bathtub of the house, and she's screaming at her husband, "Get your girl out of here." So he takes her to the garage where, long story short, he murders her. And in front of his daughter, who had a very graphic description of the murder, which is in the book. And then they spent the evening driving around trying to get rid of the body. And they tried several locations until he ended up on the field where she was found. And, he, as he's slicing and dicing, while this poor child is looking on, he's telling her, if you tell anyone, the same thing will happen to you. And already horrific things had happened to her. So she, and then she goes to school, and the next day, I can't even imagine. So I always forget his name. Who's the brilliant author who wrote Severed? He's very dark. If I turn around, I could look at his book, but he felt his mother, his mother was murdered when he was 10. And he wrote about the Black Dahlia. There was a police sketch of the man last seen with this author's mother. Red hair, just like all of this guy's victims. And so they're doing a story on it years and years later. in the LA Weekly, and my friend Jan is walking down the street and sees the LA Weekly and sees a sketch of her dad.
Oh.
What's Dad doing on the LA? And it's, the man last seen with this author's dead mother. And I have the sketch in the book, and I have George Knowlton's picture in the book, and it's clearly the same man. So
and John Gilmore.
but she wrote to that author, and he, told her no way, but way. And Jan was also contacted by retired LA cops who, the Black Dahlia was unsolved for decades. And it kept getting handed down to new cops. And these retired cops called her and said, we were told this case is now yours. You are not to solve it.
Wow.
You are to put it in a drawer. And they told her your father was high on the list of suspects, and this was not your imagination, and you're not crazy. And it's because there were some very well-known and very wealthy men that were customers in the pedophile ring. And they were not to be revealed. And so the cops protected them, and her murder is never solved.
The author is John Gilmore. John Gilmore
is the author?
Is the author that I saw, just looked up.
Okay.
Severed.
That doesn't sound right, but
I don't know. That's what it says here. But let's get to a lighter topic.
Yeah, that one's pretty dark. That one's very dark.
Well, you're married to John Provost, who played Timmy on Lassie.
Oh boy, big switch.
Big switch. Here. First of all, how did you two meet?
We met at an autograph show in 1996, and Chip from My Three Sons, Stan Livingston, introduced us. So we're very grateful to him, and it was a kind of instant attraction.
That's great.
Listen, and you both collaborated on his life story called Timmy's in the Well. Now, myself, as someone who grew up in the public eye, and I have my own memoir being shopped, it was fascinating for me to go over my own life and career in that way. What was it like for you and John to go back and revisit his time in the industry?
Really fascinating. And, he could only look at his time in the industry through a child's eyes.
Well, my gosh, I'm so glad to hear you say that, because that was the perspective I took when I wrote my story. I said, I was a child, I experienced this as a child, and I want to relate it as a child so people can understand what it's like to be a child in the industry. So anyway, yes. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
no, not at all.
Go ahead.
No,
go ahead.
But
yeah.
When I interviewed a lot of the adults in his life, he got a whole other story about it. And what, there were other layers going on that he knew nothing about, of course, and was really stunned. And also within his own family, the jealousy, the anger, there was a lot of jealousy and anger from his brother. There was a lot of pride and joy from his sister. Their mother made a choice of where she wanted to be, on the set with John, in Japan with John. So the brother, who was the oldest one, everybody was, where's mom? And some older woman is brought in to, greet them after school and make dinner. And, and they're gone for weeks or months, or, they lived in Pasadena and Pomona. So John and his mom stayed in Hollywood during the week and only came home on weekends. And until they all moved to Beverly Hills. And, so there was a lot of, at that time, his mother handled the fan mail, and she put their own address on the return envelopes, because it was an innocent time and you didn't really have to worry. And so people showed up at their door, people showed up at their door and left their children there for days at a time. I want my daughter to meet Timmy, and they were, the house was often filled with strangers. So there was a lack of attention to the other children that caused all kinds of issues that last a lifetime, and John didn't even know, he's working. He was little and too busy to understand, the feelings of being usurped, going on in his house. So when it all came together, it was really, really an interesting story, and he learned so much. Beyond his personal experiences.
Sure. So is that writing that, is that what led you to do the next one, the Child Stars, about the TV dinners, 40 classic TV kid stars?
What led me to that was I hadn't had a book out in a long time, and I looked around and said, what have I got a lot of in my life? And friends who were kid stars. And they were all so lovely to give me their stories and cooperate, because they got nothing from it except some more exposure. But it was so much fun to talk to them about their experiences. Of course, I interviewed a number of them for John's book, but then I went to a bunch of more people and got wonderful stories and photos. And the thing I love about that book is, and the thing I love about that generation is that they have all remained friends, for 50 years. Many of these people have known each other that long, and they all stayed friends with the people who played their parents. They all stayed friends with each other. And so the pictures of them at birthday parties and stuff goes on through the ages, where Angela Cartwright is, 5 years old. Ronnie Howard is 5 years old at John's birthday parties, and then you see them as adults together and through the ages. It's something really, really special about the golden age of television.
Well, when you were interviewing them, did you mostly get a sense of appreciation for their time in the business, or a bitterness at how the industry has treated them?
There are only a few who are bitter, but most absolutely love their time there. Some were not treated well.
Sure.
And that's really hard. But most of the people I spoke to had a really positive experience.
That's great. Well, let's talk about your current book. It just came out at the end of last year. Top of the Mountain, the Beatles at Shea Stadium, 1965. That is such a legendary event. We had on Felix Cavalieri from the Rascals who talked about that experience. Have you always been a huge Beatles fan, for one?
Oh, yeah.
With you being a Hollywood historian, this is like kind of a slight departure for you. So what made you decide to write about that particular event?
Well, Sid Bernstein is the gentleman who produced the event. And a friend of his told me the whole story of how Sid made it happen and all the details of what went into making this legendary concert come off. And the story was so fabulous. And it's just not out there. Even Sid in his autobiography, he dedicates maybe 10, 12 pages to the story when it was this incredible story that could never happen this way again. So I thought, I got to tell this story. And so I had Sid's story, and then I needed other perspectives. So then I just started looking for people who were at the concert, people who were in the opening acts, people who were in security, just all kinds of participants, and then the participants ended up being amazing. Like Meryl Streep was there, 16. Whoopi Goldberg is there, 9 years old. Steve Van Zandt, Joe Walsh, 2 future Beatle wives, and what are the chances of that?
Oh my
it was just it just went on, and all of these people. I mean, it was such a momentous occasion for all of them, and Felix and Mick Jagger and all these people were so happy to relive it.
But so much has been discussed about that concert. What makes it still stand out to this day that it's like this legendary thing?
Because it changed everything. Nobody had ever, there had been smaller stadium concerts, but no one had ever played to 56,000 people before. In fact, the Beatles manager, Brian Epstein, said no when Sid approached him. No, what if we don't sell it out? What if there are empty seats? At this point in 64, when Sid got the plan, there were still people saying the Beatles will never last. They're just a passing fad. They'll be bald soon and it'll all be over. And so he said, if there are empty seats, all these naysayers will be fueled. So he said no, and Sid, basically made him an offer he couldn't refuse. So he agreed. And Sid was the only one, the sole person with the vision that he knew this place would be sold out. And he was so right. He oversold the stadium. So that became, after that, stadium concerts were all you saw. And technology woke up the next morning and said, we failed. Nobody could see them. Nobody could hear them. And if this is what's going to be coming at us, we got to get better fast. And when you think 4 years later there was Woodstock, they did get ready real fast. Madison Avenue realized that this wasn't a passing fad, and that there were millions of kids that they could be selling products to that they weren't addressing. Pimple cream was about the extent of it. So that, it changed that. Men's barbershops were out, men's hairstyling was in. And also, 56,000 rock and roll fans had never laid eyes on each other before. To see, you heard that, that other countries loved the Beatles too, but here you felt it. I mean, you felt it, what it was like to be with that. It was life-changing. The people in the opening acts that I spoke to said, when they got on that stage, it really changed their lives.
I was reading it, and it's just like you said, you have so much material in there. I mean, just incredibly fascinating. How long did it take you to research this and complete the book?
I worked on it really 7 years. I mean, there were times where I laid it down, and then came back to it. But I was tracking people all that time and interviewing people, and then finding amazing photos. You know, one of the people that was in one of the opening acts, she said, well, my dad came with me that night and he took 80 color slides.
Oh.
And we looked
Oh,
at them one color. And we looked at
wow.
them once and we put them in the drawer and they're still in the drawer. Would you like them? Yeah, that would be great. And there
Oh,
were other people like that, you know, one guy sneaked onto the field, took 60 photos from the edge of the stage, one of which is the cover of the book. Another gentleman sneaked into the bowels of the stadium, and when he found an unlocked door and he opened it, he was in their dressing room.
Oh my God.
And he thought, well, I can't close the door now. And there were like 5 other people in there, you know. So he just slipped in and snap, you know. So it was amazing to suddenly, it was just, I got all these personal stories and, you know, and DJs and, you know, it was, and then to be able to say I have a couple of 100 photos that nobody has ever seen,
Right.
I was amazed. How could that
oh,
happen? Hasn't everything been said?
that's incredible.
But no, it
Um,
hadn't been. And I
it,
learned so much about them, and
yeah.
I
Well, when
just,
speak,
that was really, I just loved the experience, and
Well,
it was so unexpected.
well, in speaking to people about it, was it one of those things where you ended up finding a couple 100,000 people all claiming to be there that night?
Well, I didn't speak to that many, but no, and some, you know, many people had pictures. Some were just wonderful instamatic shots from way up, you know, but it was a great perspective. So you could see what they saw, little ants on a tiny stage, you know. And there was a documentary shot that night, and some of them show up in the documentary in the crowd. So, you know, it was really, really fun.
well, I was reading
Fun
that
descriptions.
you're looking to get this made into a series. So what's the status for that?
I'm looking for that. Yeah. You know, a little mini series, 8-parter, would be so much fun because there were so many hoops Sid had to jump through. You know, the city said, New York said yes, then they said no, Brian said no, then he said yes, you know, it goes back and forth. And meanwhile 8 months pass, and during that 8 months so much happens to the Beatles. You know, some of them get married, Ringo's expecting a baby, a friend, a casual acquaintance of George and John's, doses them with LSD when they don't know it, and their wives. And it was so early on that George had never even heard of LSD, you know, and John was absolutely furious. So, and from that, you know, they obviously lived through the experience, and they said that they could not even relate to Ringo and Paul after that, and urged them to take LSD themselves, you know. And Ringo was like, sure, I'll take it. But Paul was like, no, I don't know about that. And he waited months. And so, the split is happening. The 3 against 1 that we saw so much later, when the other 3 wanted to go with Alan Klein, and Paul stayed with his father-in-law for management after Brian Epstein died. You know, so I could actually, you know, and George and John were best friends. after that, and you're like, it's not Lennon and McCartney, it's Harrison and Lennon. So I just learned so much. It was so amazing. And it's just, here I'm like 10 or 12 during this time, not even knowing anything. Women smoking pot with Bob Dylan, all kinds of crazy stuff going on. And we were so innocent and naive. And they were so well insulated. And at a time today where security is enormous for these stars, they had, 3 guys protecting them. And look how well protected they were, not with people walking into their dressing room, but again, much more innocent time. No one wanted to do them harm. That came later. But, the life they were leading backstage and off stage was very different than what was represented.
Well, as we've discussed, you're a well-known Hollywood historian. You've been featured and the go-to person for many shows. You've been on CNN, History Channel, A&E, and so many more to discuss all things Hollywood. How did that start coming about for you? And when did you notice that you were getting lots of calls about it?
Kind of when Mysteries and Scandals came out on the E channel. They told me that their show was based on my first book. And they did cover almost everyone in my first book. So they always had me on a lot. And there weren't a lot of women historians at that time. So it was a break for me because they wanted to break up all the talking heads of men and male authors with a female. So I got invited a lot of places.
Great.
Well, we know you got to be busy as ever. We have to ask, what are you working on next?
Well, I have been working on this. There's 2 things. One, because you're a fan of Hollywood Haunted, I finally got the rights back to that book. And there were at least half a dozen chapters that were cut from the book before it was published. And it was only for size and money, not because they weren't good chapters. So I'm reissuing it within the next couple of months, Hollywood Haunted, the author's cut.
Oh, awesome.
And I'm putting back all those chapters that were cut and reworking the book a little bit. So that's been fun. And then, and I worked on that book with a wonderful historian named Mark Wanamaker, who has a world-class photo archive. And for decades, he and I have planned to do a book on the history of the Sunset Strip. We have decided we've both been so busy, and it's been such an enormous task to do that book, but this is the year. So that's our next project.
Well, Laurie, we want to thank you so much for coming on. I mean, we have so many, we're only scratching the surface. So, I mean, you're welcome back anytime because we have so many things that we'd love to cover with you. But it's been a real pleasure to have you on here. For real, I was excited about this all week about asking all these questions.
Oh, thank you. You're so kind. And I loved your questions and really got me thinking, and so many things I haven't been asked about for a long time. So that was fun. I really enjoyed it.
Well, that's great. No, thank you again. This has been Pop Culture Retro. I'm Jonathan Rosen, along with Ike Eisenmann. And again, a very special thanks to Laurie Jacobson. Go buy her book and please subscribe.
Thank you for listening to Pop Culture Retro, where no one was hurt during the making of this podcast.